I'm Ben Andriazzi.
And I'm Jennifer Storm.
We've spent our careers fighting for victims
and standing up for survivors of sexual abuse.
On Justice Interrupted, we have honest, often difficult conversations
with survivors, advocates, and experts fighting for change. Because justice should never be delayed and never interrupted.
Welcome back to Justice Interrupted. Today we have a special guest. She spent nearly 3 decades exposing where institutions fail and forcing them to answer for it. Jennifer Freeman is one of the nation's leading advocates for survivors of sexual abuse, exploitation, and child pornography, also known as CSAM. Since filing her first case in 1995, she's helped secure hundreds of millions of dollars for her clients and taken on some of the most powerful institutions in the country, from the estate of Jeffrey Epstein to major universities, religious organizations, youth groups, and school systems. But Jennifer's work goes far beyond the courtroom. She's played a critical role in exposing the FBI's failures in the Epstein investigation, helped bring one of the first Title IX cases against a university to a jury verdict, and is leading nationwide efforts to change the law so survivors can finally have access to justice. As chair of Child USA Advocacy, she's been instrumental in reforming statutes of limitations across the country, including New York's Child Victims Act and federal legislation like the Amy, Vicky, and Andy Act. She's also a sought-after voice in the national conversation, appearing on outlets like Fox, MSNBC, and PBS to shed some light on critical issues that have been in the news, especially most recently the Epstein case. So Jennifer Freeman, Jennifer Storm, and I would like to welcome you to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to be with you. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we all know that you're an established attorney, but I'm particularly interested in learning more about, how did you know that how old were you when you knew you wanted to be an attorney, and what sort of gave you the bug?
Well, I was always interested in kind of issues and writing and analysis and research. So it seemed like a natural trajectory for me. And then I had my first child sex abuse case, as you mentioned, in 1995. I filed my first one. And at that time, the statute of limitations was so short that the plaintiff and I both knew that it would not likely survive the case. But it was important. It was actually a family dispute, a young woman against her father who had sexually abused her. It's so interesting, the timing of this, Ben and Jennifer, because this past week, we filed that case in 1995. It then got, discontinued for statute of limitations reasons. And then I refiled it under the Child Victims Act. And it's now, over 30 years later. And this past week, we settled the case with the father and still have the case going on against the mother. So it's been actually a very emotional week for me, because it's kind of like dovetails everything that I've been doing for so long to bring that full circle. So it's been actually kind of beautiful this week.
Yeah, what a powerful experience. And I mean, thank you for sticking with that survivor. I can only imagine the emotions and the justice that they finally feel because of you and your tenacity. I love that. Thank you.
It was really fascinating because I went to dinner with her afterwards, just kind of celebrate. And I told her this. I could see it on her face. I could see the muscles of her face relax. And she said for the first time in her life, she felt like her life was open again. And she had hope for the future. And it was it's been magnificent to kind of work all that through with her for so long and see finally some. And, it's interesting because the father's now, 92 years old. And this got settled in the context of a mediation, and he was living at that time in Florida. But he nonetheless got on a plane and, came up in person to make sure that he could resolve it with her. So it's been a very powerful week.
Wow.
Is it fair to say without SOL reform that survivor probably never would have had a chance to pursue justice?
I think that's very fair to say, Ben. It really is remarkable the changes that we've seen. And of course, there has been a lot of change, as I see through my vantage point as chairing the Child U.S. Advocacy Board, but also, what's really, which is great, a lot of statute limitations reform, but there should be no statute limitations when it comes to child sex abuse. There just should be none.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about, obviously Epstein is front and center right now, but are there any other cases that helped define your career or had particularly meaningful impact on you? I mean, this one that you just discussed is truly remarkable to see the full circle of justice. Just so the audience is aware, are there other cases that maybe they've heard of or that have been in the news, or maybe even ones that they may not know of, that were particularly impactful for you?
Well, the other one that you mentioned was a civil rights claim case where it was my jury trial, where I represented the former women's basketball coach at Brooklyn College. And we had a trial on that because they refused to resolve it. And she was making, I think, $5,000 a year for her work as the women's basketball coach. The man was making $50,000. So we had, very big sex discrimination, Title IX, Equal Pay Act case. And that was a very important case in developing Title IX law as well. So that's been just kind of part of what I've been interested in for so many years. It's helping people achieve justice the best that we can do. So
I was going to ask about that because I've been doing Title IX work for the past probably 5 years, and it's not easy to get a Title IX case in front of a jury. So kudos to you, and appreciate you leading the way there.
Yeah, that was really, really good. And Epstein has been remarkable because it's been such a big confluence and so much attention to it. I've certainly worked on a lot of, the major child sex abuse cases like you, Ben, whether it's against the Catholic Church or schools or whomever, individuals. But Epstein has brought together so much public attention on that. And as you probably know, maybe Jennifer knows, we filed a case against the United States for, failing to pay any attention to repeated, information given to the FBI and other agencies about Epstein. We represent a woman named Rhea Farmer, who went to the FBI in 1996. Again, 30 years. That seems to be my magic number.
Right.
30 years ago, went to the FBI and told them what was happening with Epstein and Maxwell, and told them about their criminal misconduct. And what did the government do? Absolutely nothing. So had the government just done their job, then over 30 years of trauma would have been avoided, and, over 1,000 victims could have been spared. So that's another example of the kind of case that I work on. And it's just been, constant activity on that since July. It's been really nonstop for that.
So tell us a little bit about the target defendants in the different Epstein cases. So who have you been filing suits against, and what are some of the legal theories or ideas of why they might be liable or responsible for damages to the survivors?
Well, we filed a case for negligence against the United States. It's not easy to sue the United States, as you know. You have to first file a notice of claim and wait, the statutory waiting period, and supposedly they're doing their investigation of whatever they're doing, and then bring your lawsuit. But there is a tremendous amount of discretion that the U.S. government has. They have waived sovereign immunities for limited purposes like negligence, but they also have these, big exceptions to that, including this thing called discretionary function. So if there's any discretion that they could have used, then you don't get to pursue your claims. Here we found various mandatory policies that the FBI and other government agencies ignored. So we think that's a exception to the exception. So we very much believe that there's negligence here by the government. So that's been a big theory, and a very novel theory that hasn't been pursued yet previously. So that's been a very exciting thing to try to develop that theory and really try to make it work.
It really is interesting because I think everybody understands that Epstein was a scumbag, and everybody understands
100%.
that the claim against Epstein is clear cut, right? But then you start hearing other institutions that may have been responsible for enabling him. And that's where things get a little bit more complicated and you start peeling back the layers of the onions. And one of the things I thought was interesting, I don't know if you guys did this in particular, but I think some other firms did, is they pursued claims against, I believe it was Morgan Stanley and some of the other financial providers who presumably had some sort of notice, I suppose, and were still releasing like large quantities of money to Epstein. Can you comment at all in that regard about the institutional accountability of maybe some of these banks?
Yeah, well, the banks were sued under sex trafficking theories under the TVPA. So that was kind of a different approach. But the banks, on the theory that they knew, they were very much involved with Epstein for years, and internally had lots of reservations about him. And there were, tons of emails, questioning and meetings, credit meetings. Should we stop working with him? And they did not, because he was such a, quote, valuable person to them, had, provided not only the fees from him, but also access to other people, because that's what seems to be one of Epstein's expertise is to be able to connect other people. He was a big people connector. So the banks just went along, whether it was JP Morgan or Deutsche Bank, and now Bank of America. So there have been various financial institutions that have to be, are responsible for playing their part. And there were claims against the Epstein estate itself. And those were, advanced by the Child Victims Act and other window claims that were allowed due to the kind of work that we've been doing of statute of limitations reform. So those have been the primary targets for those kinds of claims.
Let's explore the FBI claim, because I think that's novel, it's interesting, and it's sort of, it's present, right? Is that something that's ongoing?
Oh yeah.
Can you, when people think of civil lawsuits, they think of money damages, and obviously, victims should be entitled to financial restitution or recovery. There's nothing that they should be ashamed of. But I'm curious if you think that this lawsuit against the FBI might help to uncover some of the answers to questions that victims and even the general public has had for years.
I very much believe that and hope so. Unfortunately, until we brought our lawsuit, that we were met with all kinds of barriers. One of the things we wanted immediately and sought FOIA request after Freedom of Information Act request after Freedom of Information Act request to get was any kind of documentation to support Maria Farmer's efforts to contact the FBI in 1996, and she spoke with them again in 2006. We wanted those documents and made numerous efforts to get them. And in our most recent, this is pre-lawsuit, most recent effort to get them through the Freedom of Information Act, because we wanted to get the documents before we started, right? That would be ideal. We were told, the response from the government was, we will get back to you. We're not saying whether we have them or we don't have the documents. This was in January 2025, they responded. And they said, we will get back to you by November 2027. So almost 3 years later, they were going to let us know whether they had any documents. And the only reason the document, the one page that we eventually received came out is because of the Epstein Files Transparency Act, the statute that, caused the disclosure of 3.5 million pages of documents, not yet the entire batch of documents, which we're still working to get, but that came out in the first production on December 19th, 2025, which was another magnificent day in, Maria Farmer's life and my life. I spoke to her that day, and she said it was one of the best days of her life. She had tears of joy and tears of sorrow, tears of joy because finally, after being, vilified and called a liar and called pathological and said she just made this whole thing up, there was actual proof that she did what she said she did, which is to report Epstein to the FBI. And tears of sorrow because it took, again, 30 years to get that. And look how much tragedy had happened in the interim that could have been avoided. So it was mixed day for her and for me.
I'm sure. So it's like the non-attorney on the call.
Yeah.
What was the allowance that gave the government the ability to say, "Oh, we're gonna push this back to 2027"? Was it just do they just have the ability to say that, and there's no deadlines baked into law?
There's no, they're supposed to be reasonably responsive, but they responded that they just said that we'll get back to you, X date. It wasn't, it's not clear enough to be able to do that. And you can bring a lawsuit on the Freedom of Information Act, but I said, forget that. Let's just see them.
Yeah.
It just isn't happening the way it should be happening. I mean, I see them before this whole all these Epstein issues emerged. So, we just thankfully have been part of the process moving things forward, which has really been very exciting to see. And just the public attention all the time, constant media attention to this has been a different kind of, I've certainly, as probably like you, Ben, and maybe like you also, Jenny, we do media from time to time when the cases come up and there's something to say, but this nonstop media attention to this is something that's been quite different.
It really is a unique case.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about the FBI, we talked about the banks, we talked about Epstein himself. One of the things I've always heard, sort of in the background is what about other defendants, like people who were visiting Epstein on his island? Are there other governmental agencies that maybe covered things up? Do you anticipate that there will be more litigation beyond that, which is already pending, that is related to the Epstein case?
Well, it depends on whether we can open some more windows, actually, because certainly there was a lawsuit by Virginia Giuffre against the man formerly known as Prince Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. And that was another example of another, line of litigation. And there presumably are other perpetrators involved in this matter. But usually the claims are so old that you'd have to have likely a window to start them again. So we've been looking at something that they're calling Virginia's Law, Virginia Giuffre, to try to open a window under the Sex Trafficking Act to see if that will allow victims and survivors to have other paths forward with people that are not Epstein.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about what you see is just broadly the impact that the Epstein case has had on society. Because, the way I'm looking at it, it's shed a whole new light in the way that, like, sort of this relationship between money, power, sexual abuse, to a level that we've never seen before. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
Well, that's such an interesting question, and is something I think about, and I'm sure you do. Both of you do as well, because when you're looking back at when Maria Farmer reported, the attitudes were just so different then. And why did they ignore her? Why did they take no action whatsoever? They did they put her report into something called the zero files, which means they were going to take zero action against involved in that. Why did they do that? As opposed to, I think today people actually, in large part because of all this attention, actually do take these kinds of claims seriously. But why didn't they care?
Yeah.
What happened to so many, young women and girls, especially Annie Farmer, Maria's sister, who was 16 when she was sexually assaulted by Epstein and Maxwell in New Mexico.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you ask the average person, they're appalled when you talk about child abuse, right? Like it's one of the most devastating things. And yet for decades, systems have covered it up. And as Ben indicated, it's because unfortunately power and money reign supreme. It's incredibly disturbing, but I do think folks like you and Ben have created this path of justice for survivors. And I love how you've been kind of explaining the different reactions to the survivors that you've worked with, because so many people think that this path of civil justice is about money. And as Ben said, money is important. It's important for therapy and repair and harm. But it's so rarely about that. It's about those pieces of the puzzle that they don't have. It's about validity, feeling like that, oh, somebody believes me. And, I'm not this hysterical person that's been screaming, from the sidelines, but this is actually something that happened to me. And that alone, like when you just described the way her face just kind of relaxed and the tears of both sorrow and joy, it's about that. It's about that personal justice of being believed, and especially when it's in a public way, because the victim blaming and shaming that we have done for decades is just horrific.
It's really, it's so hurtful for them. And we have to look at the reality that money is all the law really can offer you. It's, you can't revive the statute of limitations for crimes.
Mm-hmm.
So what most people really want, most victims and survivors that I talk to, I'd be interested in what your experience is, Jennifer, and Ben on this, say, I really just want him to be held responsible. I want to put him in jail if he's still alive.
Yeah.
That's what really most survivors want, but they can't. So all they have are these civil claims. That's the only justice you really have. And the civil claims and the only justice they can really award you is financial.
Yep.
So, you can say, well, this is all about money, but that's really the only remedy that the law offers them is financial.
It's almost like I will often tell clients, it's kind of like extracting a pound of flesh from the defendant. And it's symbolic of taking something away from somebody that is in power and removing it from them and giving it to somebody that they've wronged. And it's an imperfect system. And I know, you're talking a little bit about your career, and I'm sure you have regrets that you made throughout your career. And I think one of mine was just focusing solely on that and thinking I did a great job if the client got $1 million, but they didn't feel validated through the process. And I think that's one of the things that is unique. And I think you've done an excellent job in this situation is, identifying all the potential defendants to try to get full accountability and responsibility. And that's why I think this lawsuit against the FBI is really something positive, and, a step in the right direction for survivors.
Mm-hmm. I think also in terms of the financial impact, when it comes to institutions, it really can affect their conduct. It can encourage them or mandate them to actually pay attention when they have representatives that are going to be hurting children. They can take action. They can take action promptly. They can pay attention to it, and they can know that they're going to be held accountable legally if they don't act. So I think it's a little easier to understand when you think about it in those terms, that procedures can change, and they have changed dramatically.
I'm sorry. Do you think in the near future we'll learn more about Epstein's connections with people in power? I mean, I know there's been a release, 3 million pages. I obviously haven't seen them. I'm sure you haven't seen every single document. You may have had access to it, but and I don't want to wear a tinfoil hat here, but one of the things that really concerned me is, and it actually started to make a little bit of sense. What if Epstein was truly like a CIA agent, or he was, involved with an Israeli operative? And what if the reason the government was covering for him was because they needed him? And then at that point, is the government placing, more emphasis on these connections with foreign countries and agents than they are with the livelihood of children? So I hope I'm not coming across as a conspiracy theorist, but to me, as just taking off my lawyer hat and just being a citizen of the United States, that's concerning to me.
Well, it's also, that could very well be that was part of it. But also in the 1990s, just about the time that Maria Farmer came forward and reported Epstein and Maxwell to the FBI, Epstein was involved with something called Towers Financial, which was at that time the largest Ponzi scheme ever at that time. I forget what it was, 500 million, 450 million, something in that neighborhood. And it was a very large one. And he was either the number 2 or the number 3 person working for a guy named Stephen Hoffenberg. Stephen Hoffenberg went to jail due to a prosecution. And one of my theories is that he was a government informant of some kind and worked on that case to help convict Hoffenberg. And as a result, they, turned the other way when Maria Farmer came in. I don't know if that's so, but that's a theory I really want to test by looking at the documents.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see what those Towers financial documents reveal. But the other interesting thing about 1996, these 30-year timeframes, is that Maria Farmer spoke not only about the sexual abuse that Epstein had perpetrated, but also his efforts to engage in child pornography, or CSAM. He and Maxwell had stolen photographs that she kept. She was an artist. And she kept certain, partially dressed photographs of her little sisters, who were minors, to help her with her anatomical studies. These are artist reference photos. And they had stolen those photos when they, at the same time that they also committed sexual assault of Maria. And that she reported that also. And that's part of this. And if only the government had paid attention to that, whether it's in 1996 or 2006, because remember, there was this effort to hold him accountable in 2006. And there was an ongoing effort to try to get you may remember this. When he was arrested, there was this photograph of his desk where there were wires coming out, but there were no computers. There were monitors and wires, no computers. The computers were gone. It looked like they had just left because the wires were kind of all over the place and everything was a mess. And there was an ongoing effort by the AUSA, the Assistant U.S. Attorney, to try to retrieve those computers to see what was on them, because the theory was there would be child pornography on them. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that was correct. Eventually, that's exactly what was shown, is there was child pornography on them. And this sweetheart deal that they cut with him in 2007, 2008 was just before there was an effort to really press Epstein to give over those computers. And had the government only done their job and really tried to get the real evidence, it could have been a lot easier prosecution of that fellow because having child pornography on your computer is a lot easier than trying to convince that this person was sex trafficking children.
Yeah.
So it's really a whole aspect of the case that was ignored. When Maria Farmer in 1996 told them again in 2006, yet they again did nothing about that. So there's so many issues that so many ways that the government failed these survivors.
Jennifer, and correct me if I'm wrong, was Pam Bondi, she was involved in some way in the underlying investigation, correct?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what her role was, but she was, yes. I think she was the Attorney General of Florida at that time.
I just feel like there's so many layers of this. I don't know that we will ever in our lifetime, you tell this story about, you opened and told a really compelling story about a survivor in 1995 who just got justice now. Mm-hmm. I mean, this may be a 30, 40, 50 year journey for survivors to hopefully get to the truth.
That seems to be what's happening. As frustrating as that is, but we will not stop. We just will not stop until we do get that truth, because that's what's really important. And that's what opens up your life for the survivors. I mean, Jennifer, I assume you see this in your work, where you see the change, you see the transformation, you can actually see it.
Oh, yeah. No, 100%. Now, you had said something earlier that really struck me. And that is, a lot of folks don't understand that so many of these civil cases enable that survivor to be an active part of that policy reform. Because any survivor you talk to, they'll say, I want my person held accountable, and I don't want this to ever happen to another person. And that policy change and the procedural changes that they can be a part of, whether it's through a bankruptcy proceeding or just negotiated into the civil lawsuit, it's significant, because that for them is that ability to say, okay, I did this. And hopefully, because of me coming forward and having this access of justice, there's going to be this protection in place. It's so important.
It's really, really true.
Jennifer, tell us a little bit about, my hope is that the audience of this will will be parents who are looking for tips on keeping children safe, potentially other survivors who are looking for a space to learn about, criminal, administrative, or civil systems. Can you tell us about? I mean, you've had a really incredible career. What are some of the lessons that you've learned, and what are like sort of some of the trends that you've seen over the years in generally the child sexual abuse space?
Well, pay attention. If you're a parent, pay attention. And if you see a change in your child's behavior, find out why, if you possibly can. Take a deeper look and be curious about what's going on, and hopefully have a good enough relationship with it, your child will be able to talk to you. I think what's important about what we've all been doing is that it does educate the parents, educate other people in our culture to pay attention that these things are happening, so that you can't have the Catholic Church bishop saying, oh, this is just a lie. This is just a lie. This never happened. We don't do this at the Catholic Church, or we don't do this at the school, or we don't do this at the camp, because this does happen, and it's really just more frequent than people really believed in the past. So I think it's very important to know that this is happening, and how important it is to identify the people that are perpetrators and bring those names forward and get that information out. Yep. And to continue to change and reform the statute of limitations. And I'd love to see, as I said, the abolition of statute of limitations all over the country. I mean, unfortunately, it's a state by state thing. So I don't see how to do it any other way. Ben, if you have any, or Jennifer, you have another way to do it, I'd love to know, but yeah. I don't see a better way to do it. But we're all ears to try to figure out what's the best way forward to give people both understanding and tools to make a difference in their lives.
Yeah, I think our society has for so long relied upon our criminal justice system to tell us who the bad guys are and who the good guys are, right? And lately, over the past couple of years, it's because of attorneys like the two of you and all of these filings and all of this civil liability that has enabled, I think, just your average person, which includes, very importantly, future jurors on child abuse cases, because we've all seen how many times a child will take the stand, tell their whole full truth, and you'll have jurors that do not convict. And then later when they're polled, will say, well, I just couldn't even fathom that the uncle would have done that, or that was a coach in their community. And so I think one of the huge shifts culturally that individuals like the two of you have made is that mindset shift, that people are like, oh no, this does happen. It happens. Yeah. And so that hopefully will have that trickle effect over into the criminal spaces for those young kids who can come forward and take advantage of the criminal justice system, which we also now know our children are being better educated and empowered. And so we are seeing disclosure happen quicker. And I think statistically, when we look back at this time, we're going to just see such a shift in all of the horrible trends we used to have to say, right? The average age of disclosure is 52. And, I think when we look back on this in 30 years, I hope, and I think that those statistics are going to look so much different.
I certainly hope so. But, the one of the areas that still is very much under changing is the CSAM area, the child pornography area.
Yep.
There's so much of that, with our kids, with that they're just bombarded with this. And whether it's taking those phones away from kids in school, I think that should be seriously considered, those kinds of changes, so that kids can focus and everything's not recorded.
Yeah. My 10-year-old knows he is not getting a smartphone. It is going to be a Nokia until you're 18, and then you make a decision.
Jennifer, I think you, Freeman, I think you hit the nail on the head, because we sort of pat ourselves on the back because we've elevated the discourse on sexual abuse to the extent that we no longer believe that if we let our kid out on a bike, that somebody's going to drive by in a minivan and, sexually assault them, right? It's like, we know now about grooming. We know now about the people who have access to our children. We know more about the profile. But when you said that CSAM is an increasing threat to children, I 1,000,000% agree with you. And I think that is where we need to focus a lot of our efforts. In particular, now you're seeing litigation brought against many of these digital platforms that are enabling, the exchange of some of these images. I think you're right. As parents, we got to ask questions. We got to be vigilant. But that's the area that I agree with you that we really need to focus on, because I could see that being problematic in the next decade or two.
Yeah, and we're working on the MDL, the multi-district litigation in California, involved with the CSAM and its addictive effects on children. That's something else we've been working on. And the last two cases have been positive, for us, and negative for, the Metas of the world, the internet service provider kind of institutions. And that's, that gives me some hope there too.
Yeah, just for the audience, for years and years, these digital platforms have hid behind something called the Communications Decency Act. And it's taken, I remember, I litigated a case. It's taken about 20 years to start to generate some better case law, some more creative ways to get around it. Because the idea that just because you are publishing content that you didn't originate, that you should be immune is just silly. And these digital platforms have really taken what was intended to maybe be a safety measure, and they've exploited it. So we're seeing a little bit of progress. I'm hopeful that attorneys like you will be able to continue to lead the charge in chiseling away at the Communications Decency Act and holding these organizations accountable. So the CSAM is, we can never eliminate it, but we got to try to keep it to a minimum.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So Jennifer, I really want to thank you for coming on. I learned a lot about this case. If anybody wants to reach you, or excuse me, I learned a lot about the Epstein case and your career. It's been one I think that should be modeled by many other attorneys in the future. If people want to reach you, where can they find you?
I'm at the Marsh Law Firm. I'm special counsel there. You can reach me at Jennifer Freeman at marsh.law. Just send me an email. A lot of people do.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for all that you've done on behalf of survivors. And hopefully our audience is going to learn a lot and appreciate and understand how important the different mechanisms that the law allows for us to seek and access justice. So if you are a parent or a loved one out there, please, do some research, look at your state's statute of limitation law, see if there's areas for you to advocate. I think we need armies to get these statute of limitations abolished and to get windows open so that people can have justice and have those moments that you have spoken of today. So just thank you so much.
And thank you, Ben and Jennifer, for putting attention on all these issues. I've been watching your podcasts, and they're spot on in so many ways. So it's really great that you're focused on this and helping people understand better these issues.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us on Justice Interrupted.
If this episode moved you, informed you, or gave you hope, please share it.
And don't forget to follow, rate, and review the show wherever you're listening.
For more resources, links, and ways to take action, check out the show notes.
Until next time, keep speaking up, keep fighting for justice.